You're listening to TJ's One of Us for the Always Next Year Podcast Studio Network. You can find the team on our Twitter at ANY Podcast. You can also find us on our website, www.alwaysnextyearpodcast.com. And now, to bring us in, the Jackdaws.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such eager my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son still had me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
Hello and welcome to another episode of TJ's One of Us for the Always Next Year Podcast. That was the Jackdaws bringing us in, an Irish folk rock band. It's Andrew, my brother Andrew, is the lead there, and his wife Tiff. And then they have a floating member of people there. But my name is Shane. I'm here with Rob for the Always Next Year Podcast here, again, talking some 76ers basketball. Rob, how are you, sir?
It would be better if the Sixers were still playing.
We would be better if the Sixers were still playing, because I still believe they're better than both of the remaining teams in the East. But that is neither here nor there. Kawhi Leonard had something other than that to say. So, but we had two Sixer segments earlier in the week. We had one that wrapped up just Game 7, is primarily what we talked about, and a little bit of the Toronto series as a whole. I did a question and answer segment to review some of the questions that came in from the website, which again, if you use that, is www.alwaysnextyearpodcast.com. And then this one is going to be just a full year reflection here now. Before, we're not going to talk off season stuff. That'll be another separate segment. We'll have Kevin on that. We'll have Connor on that. But for this one here, it's just me and Rob. We're going to talk just some things throughout this 76er season, which was, again, we've mentioned it a handful of times this week, a really special season. So we're going to go through three key moments that define the season for us as fans. 3 of the worst losses, 3 of the biggest wins. A player report card, which should be fun because 26 freaking players suited up for the 76ers this year, which was more than any year during the process eras, which is amazing to me, which when you're trying to lose basketball games, you would assume you'd have 55 different guys playing for you. Not the case. We're going to evaluate Brett Brown and Elton Brand. We'll talk Brett Brown's new contract just a little bit. Not new contract, the fact that they're bringing him back for next year. And then we'll reflect on the process as a whole. But we're going to start it out, like I said, with 3 key things that defined this season for us as fans. We'll go one and one. We'll go back and forth. Rob, we'll start with you.
Well, number one, I'm going to go with the trade to get Jimmy Butler.
That was mine as well.
That's hands down. The trade, it's a big blockbuster deal. You send away Covington and Sarge, which were 2 fan favorite players here in Philadelphia. Covington maybe not so much, but everybody loves Sarge. Covington being that shutdown defender that they probably could have used at some points in the season, but Jimmy down the stretch, and especially in the fourth quarter of some big basketball games, definitely made that trade worthwhile. So that was, to me, the biggest moment of the Sixers season.
Yeah, I agree. When you go ahead and you sign a guy like Jimmy Butler, who is opting out of the last year of his deal, and you're going to have to re-sign him, and you ship out, just as you mentioned, 2 really, really key pieces to what we thought was going to be the final pieces of the process, and you ship them both out. And let's not forget Jared Bayless, who was just awesome during his time here in Philly. But you told the fan base and you told your team and organization that we are here to win it right now. And you elevated your expectations from let's win 2 series in the playoffs and see where it goes, to we believe that we can contend for an NBA championship right now. That was going to be the vision of the new core, the new big 3 here. So Jimmy Butler, the acquisition that was for both of us, that was our number ones. For number 2, I'll give you mine. Was the draft day trade where we drafted Mikal Bridges. We were actually in a ANY podcast meeting at a restaurant, and we drafted him, and then 45 minutes later, not 45 minutes later, but it felt like that, we get the alert that he's then being moved in a deal that got us Zaire Smith and the Miami first that ended up being used in the Tobias Harris deal.
I was so mad about that. Not the trade, the Harris deal, but just trading away Mikal Bridges. I'm a Villanova guy. He's one of my favorite players. And he had a much better rookie season than Zaire Smith did.
Well, anyone had a better rookie season than Zaire Smith. He played like 14 minutes all year. Not his fault. He got hurt and almost died for this team. Let's not forget that he literally almost died. But that draft night trade and that kind of thing, and it's so hard. His mom works for the organization, has worked there forever. You mentioned it. He's a Villanova guy. The fan base was undoubtedly super stoked for it. All over Twitter. Again, being in the restaurant with you and Elle, and I think it was just the three of us that night. We're scouring Twitter. We're looking and we're like, damn, everyone's really loving this pick. Everyone's loving this. This is a good thing. And then, like I said, it was 6 picks later when we flip them for the Miami first and Zaire Smith, who was drafted by Phoenix. And like I mentioned, we used that to then complete the process for this year in the acquisition of Tobias Harris, Boban, and Mike Scott. So for me, that was another pivotal thing that happened this year that kind of told the story of what this season was going to be for the Philadelphia 76ers. They were committed to winning right now. They were okay with trading a 22-year-old rookie in Landry Shamet and a pick. And then obviously the remaining pieces of that deal were with Muscala, Wilson, and I feel like there was someone else that got moved too. But to acquire Tobias Harris, another expiring guy, that tells a lot about the direction of this franchise.
I'm actually going to go with that as my number 2 moment, the trade to get Toby, Bobby, and the 3 general managers, they call him, Mike Scott. I mean, it had its ups and downs. Obviously, I was not a big fan of getting rid of Landry Shamet. I thought that he had a really high upside, but you needed to replace Wilson Chandler at the 4. I mean, to have as talented as a starting lineup as they did, and then to have Wilson Chandler in there at the 4,
or Mike Muscala,
somehow in the starting lineup, it didn't make any sense to me. So they needed to upgrade, and they did. They brought in Toby, and he played pretty well for us. He had his moments. He's kind of up and down a little bit, but definitely an upgrade over Wilson Chandler, and it did kind of cement them as a championship contender to make that trade. Mike Scott was a key piece off the bench, played really well for us in the playoffs. Boban had his moments. Obviously, became a fan favorite here because of how goofy he looks and how big he is and all that kind of stuff. The fact that he can dunk without jumping. But, yeah, that's my number 2 moment for the season. And I think that once that they made that trade, that was what cemented the thought in everybody's mind that this team wants to win it all this year.
Yeah, I remember, again, I must have fallen asleep 5 minutes before that trade happened in the middle of the night. And I woke up to it, and I remember reading the tweet, and I was like, no, that doesn't sound right. Like, it's our only bench piece. I felt like, and we've talked about it ad nauseum almost over the last year, do we acquire stars or do we acquire bench pieces and more depth and more playable NBA talent, like playoff level talent that you can put out there? I kept saying we don't need additional stars. Let's stick with Ben. Let's stick with Joe. And then when we got Jimmy, I certainly didn't think we needed to add another star. Elton Brand and the 76ers decided that was the opposite of what they wanted to do, and they wanted to create the best starting 5 in the NBA. And they could argue that they did that, kind of, maybe a top 3. And just the bench really could have used a guy like Landry, you're right. But the deal does not get done without him, so... my number 3 is, it's kind of a 2-part thing. My number 3 was Joel Embiid's first half and the way that the 76ers and Brett Brown used him. And then his mysterious knee injury that kept him out for basically the entire second half. And really robbed this team of the opportunity to sit there and get to know each other and play 27 games with Tobias Harris, Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, JJ Redick, and that dog shit bench, dollar to the swear jar. For me, that was a really, really telling thing. When you decided to play Joel Embiid the most minutes of any big in the NBA throughout the first half of the season, coming after his previous 2 years, I felt like it was a really, really poor decision from a logic standpoint. And again, you really robbed yourself of creating some natural chemistry that would have been really benefiting in the playoffs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's not my number 3, but I definitely agree that certainly played a role in how the season played out. My number 3 is finally getting rid of that waste of space, fake injury having Markelle Fultz.
Oh, Mark.
Thank God I never have to hear that name again, and also thank God I never have to hear the name Raymond Brothers ever again.
Yes.
Because, oh my God, man. That whole thing, that whole saga just drove me nuts, and they kept talking about it every single day, every time I turned on WIP or whatever. They kept talking about it. And you know what? Ever since they made that trade, I haven't heard his name mentioned once. Maybe in the few days after, maybe in the week after, but ever since then...
We got a question in about him, actually. In the question and answer, yeah. Yeah, someone had mentioned, do you regret that trade, seeing how bad the bench was and how thin the bench was in the playoffs? And I do think that he would have been a more valuable bench player, honestly, in the playoffs, but there is no way that you keep him and... He was going to make $9.5 million next year.
Did he even play for Orlando in their series against Toronto? I don't think he did.
No, he didn't. He didn't play a game for Toronto or for Orlando.
There it is.
So yeah, I mean, and let's be serious. If he was in Philadelphia, I'm assuming that he would have eventually dressed for us. But again, going to his town, he truly gets to just have an off season and start game 1 and see how things go. But yeah, the Markelle Fultz saga, and I. Embarrassingly so, was a very pro Markelle Fultz guy throughout most of it. It wasn't until those last several weeks where I finally got off that. I said, you know what? You guys are all correct. He's an asshat, and I'm tired of him. I'm tired of his attorney. I'm tired of his mom. I'm tired of the fake stories. I'm tired of the real stories. I just wanted the kid who wanted to ball out in Washington. And damn it, he's just not that guy. He is just a chump. So I like your number 3. I think that was a season-defining thing as well.
Something that a lot of people have forgotten about, too.
It's because no one gives a shit about him anymore, Dollar Swear Jar. So we're going to go to some of our worst losses this year, because I want to get some of the bad crap out of the way first. I have a feeling that we're going to share some of the same losses here. So we'll go to you first for your worst loss of the season.
Well, I mean, it might not be the worst performance-wise, but... obviously, Sunday has to be number 1. Losing Game 7 on a buzzer beater, I could not drink enough to erase it from my memory. I'm still working on that. But yeah, that's as tough as it gets.
We've installed a mini bar in studio, specifically for when we have to talk about Kawhi's shot.
And Steve's...
Whiskey Ramble segment.
Steve's Whiskey Rambles, yep.
Yeah, we got a couple bottles of Jameson in here just for him.
But yeah, I mean, that's got to be the number 1 for me. Losing a season-deciding game on a buzzer beater, it doesn't get any tougher than that.
Yeah, I agree. I actually kind of left all playoff moments out. I went specifically regular season because it was easy to. I mean, that's an obvious one. That was pretty bad. I'm gonna go. So with my first one, and these are in no particular order. These are just 3 that I took and that really stood out to me. Throughout the year, was the overtime loss early in the year to Charlotte, 133-132. They got outscored in the second half by 15 points. And Charlotte at the time, Charlotte was not a good basketball team. They had no business being in that basketball game. We let them back in. They tie it up. We lose in overtime. That's a lot of minutes. And we play that game, and I think it was on a Wednesday night. We had to play again the next night on Thursday night, and we ended up dropping that game as well. Also in overtime, and also got dramatically outscored in the second half and overtime. So that was a back-to-back loss early in the year that neither of those games needed to happen. I think that if you win that first game, as they should have, that would have been 2 games closer to being able to go to that take over the 2 seed from Toronto throughout this season. And that to me is really important. Those winnable games that you screw up at. That's a problem for me, and that was one of the ones that happened early on.
Yeah, I agree with that. You add those games up, those games that they could have won, that puts them in the 2 seed that has Game 7 at home, and potentially a very different outcome for that Game 7 if it is at home, given how much better they played at the Wells Fargo Center.
Yeah, for sure.
So with my number 2 pick, I'm going to go with the only Sixers game that I actually ended up going to this year.
Cavs game?
The Cavs game. And it pissed me off so much because whenever I go see them play against the Cavs, I go with my buddy Drayton, who's a Cavs fan, because he's got family in Cleveland. Every time the Cavs come to Philadelphia, he wants to go see them play. All the games that we've seen between the Sixers and the Cavs have won every single one. And I was so confident coming into this one.
That was their first home loss of the year, wasn't it?
It was, yes. I was so confident coming into this one, given that the Sixers have this great team, and the Cavs are finally bad again without LeBron, and they beat us by about 20 points. It was terrible.
Yeah, they were never in that game.
They were. I think they actually had the lead in the third quarter at some point, but then the Cavs went on like a 15-0 run or something like that. So, yeah, that was pretty terrible. But I got a good deal on hats. That night I ended up, it was buy one, get one on the hats, and they give you the price of the lower costing hat. So I ended up getting a $60 hat for free.
Nice.
In addition to the $30 hat that I bought.
That is a solid. Was that because they got blown out? What was the thing?
No, it was just a discount that they had going for that night.
Nice.
But, yeah, still a terrible game.
My number 2 is the Paul George shot.
That was pretty tough, too.
I dislike that. We were actually texting during that game, and I remember this. And I remember I was sitting on the recliner, I was watching this game, and again, at this point, we still had not yet figured out the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think that was the 19th game that they had won in a row. And I was on the recliner, Stephanie was laying on the couch, Elle was up in his room, and again, Elle's a Sixer hater because he's just dead inside. And our home is just such a piece of crap. Like, I'm very embarrassed about where we live. It's not a great place. But you hear everything. So, I mean, on one hand, I feel really bad for Elle. On another hand, I feel really bad for me every single time that anything bad happens in sports, because he's going to let me know about it and I can hear it through the floor. So I heard his celebration when Paul George sunk that shot, and damn, I was pissed off. So that game in particular, again, a very winnable game. And they just let it slip away, and we just had yet to figure out the Thunder.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. That was a 4-point play, was it not, at the end?
Yeah.
And then the Sixers had a chance to come back and win at the other end. Jimmy missed a buzzer beater. And yeah, that was a pretty rough game because, as you said, the 19th consecutive loss. We finally beat them the next time around down in OKC. Finally got that monkey off their back. But yeah, that was a tough loss. That was a chance to go out, and that was another one of the games that you talk about, a game that they should have won.
Yep. That
could have helped them towards that 2 seed, and they ended up throwing it away. And doing it against a primetime opponent on national television, a chance to really go out and make a statement. Yeah, it's pretty tough. And I'm going to stick along the same lines with my number 1 pick and blowing that big lead against Golden State at home on a national televised, I think it was like a Saturday night game or something like that. They had like a 20-point lead or something, maybe 15, 20 points going into the second half, and they just got obliterated in the second half, and they ended up losing by about 10 points.
Yes.
That was, especially after going out there and beating Golden State on the road in Oakland, that's a game that they should have had, and they let it slip away. So that's my number 3 spot.
So I struggled with that one, and then I ended up taking one that really, in the grand scheme of things, isn't that big of a deal, but I think it's going to be a really big deal, and it's going to be all people talk about if Jimmy Butler doesn't resign here, but the Bulls loss. That was the first time it was one of 2 times that we know about.
The Zach LaVine buzzer beater?
Yes, because of the miscommunication between, I don't know if it was between Jimmy and Mike Scott or Ben and Mike Scott, but there was a miscommunication that left him just to do whatever the hell he wanted and get right inside and take that little floater. So, and it was weird, because they had to come back out and they had to play 0.4 of a second or whatever it was. And there was that camera shot that we still hear about, Jimmy Butler sitting there on the bench saying, "I told you that shit don't work. And we're not putting $1 in a swear jar because he said it, we didn't."
We're allowed to quote him.
We're allowed to quote him. But that was that first time where we could tell the frustration with the defensive assignments that Jimmy had with what Brett was doing. Now, again, we only know about 2 real instances with Jimmy Butler where he kind of challenged the coach and challenged the staff there. But for the most part, he's been a phenomenal teammate. But if he chooses to go somewhere else, we may look at things like that. And that's why I think that Bulls game becomes really important. It was that Bulls team was terrible basketball team.
They beat us a couple times this year too.
We lost to bad teams all year. If you even split with Brooklyn, that's it's only one more win, but we lost 3 games to them. That doesn't work. We lost to Atlanta twice at the end of the year. We lost to Orlando once. We lost to. There were so many winnable games and winnable opponents there that it's just. it's tough to see, and you look back on and you say, damn, how important that Game 7 would have been at home against Toronto. And, you realize these games matter.
I mean, this is a team that could have and probably should have won 60 games this year.
I agree.
But then you factor in the games that they blew, and yeah, that's why they only won 51.
Yep. And again, big part of it, second half, you don't have Joe, and that changes things. But we're going to go into our... Did we hit all your losses, by the way? We hit all yours. Good. We're going to go into our 3 most impactful or favorite wins that we witnessed this year. You can include playoffs if you want. I did not. I went regular season.
I'll go regular season as well, just to
we'll
keep
go
it
with
consistent.
You want to start?
Yeah.
Go for it.
I'll go with finally beating Boston, even though they didn't have Kyrie in that game, I think it was. I mean, just going out there and finally beating the Celtics on national television, Jimmy with that big shot at the end, striking the pose, which we all still have ingrained in our minds.
Erect the statue if he signs here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was a huge win for the Sixers, and I think that had they ended up playing Boston in the playoffs, I think that they would have won that series pretty easily.
So you have that confidence in them because they finally figured them out. I did not. I felt like we still would have lost to Boston. But that game was important to me for a multitude of different reasons. It was a game where we did see the full starting 5 that we were going to roll out in the playoffs. And so this was the way they were going to be utilized in the playoffs as well. We knew that the way that this team was built, that we had no bench. So we were going to get 35, 36, 37 plus from every one of the starters, except for JJ. But here's what the stat lines were for these starters in that game. 41 minutes played by Joel Embiid, who scored 37, grabbed 22 boards, and had 4 assists. Tobias Harris scored 21, 8 boards, 3 assists in 37 minutes. Jimmy Butler in 37 minutes had 22 points, 4 boards, and 2 assists. Ben Simmons had 13 points, 8 boards, 7 assists in 42 minutes. And then again, JJ played the fewest minutes of the starters at 32, and he had 17 points, a rebound, and 3 assists. That to me started to tell a story as to what that starting 5 can do at the biggest of stages, playing that kind of minutes. And to finally get that monkey off their back in Boston was huge. And so to beat an opponent like that, there was certainly an invincibility that I began to feel if all 5 were healthy.
If my memory serves me right, that was also the game where Jimmy went off for like 16 or 17 points in the fourth quarter.
Yes.
After he'd been like
Pretty
dead
cold.
silent for 3 quarters.
Yeah, pretty cool.
So that told me a lot about who Jimmy was as a fourth quarter guy. And that's actually, I'm going to continue on that point with my number 2 game, which is another, Jimmy's really his first moment showing that he is a true fourth quarter dog, the guy that gets the job done at the end. And this is the Charlotte game where he comes in, I think maybe it's his second or third game as a Sixer.
It was in his first week as a Sixer.
Yeah,
yes.
Somewhere along there. And tie game at the end of the first overtime, I believe it was, the game that Kemba Walker went off for 60 points. Jimmy comes up with a steal at one end off of Kemba Walker, and then out of the timeout, does the ISO, hits that three-pointer with 0.3 of a second left to go, game winner. And then a couple games later, he does it again against Brooklyn.
Yep.
So that's my number 2 thing. Just Jimmy Butler taking over late in the game and hitting the big shots when the team needed him to. And that was a prelude to what he would end up doing on a number of occasions throughout the season.
Absolutely. And it speaks volumes to a player like him. Because again, you mentioned it, he could be cold for 3 quarters, but you got to respect him in the fourth. Does not matter. And we saw it in the playoffs a lot, Not a lot. He did take over a little bit more in the playoffs than what he had during the regular season. But there were a few games. Game 7 was one of them. He did not have his best stuff, until late that third quarter. But Jimmy Butler was a special dude. So
if Kawhi doesn't hit that buzzer beater, then that layup by Jimmy might be the biggest shot of the season.
Yeah, for sure. My first game was Boston with you. So my second game was beating the Bucks 130 to 125. I know that Giannis went off for 50-something that night, but to me, that there were a couple different things that were really, really true to me when I saw that win. One, that was the first time we saw Brett Brown willingly make an outside-the-box adjustment. He put Joel Embiid on Giannis, and Giannis had to shoot a lot to get his 50-plus points that night. The ball was constantly in his hands. And with exerting that much energy at the defensive end of the floor for Joel Embiid, Joel also put up 40, snagged 15 boards, and had 6 assists. That was huge. And then Jimmy Butler in that game, same type of thing. It was another fourth quarter game for Jimmy. He put in 27, 6 and 3 on that night. So for me, that Bucks game, winning 130 to 125 against the eventual number 1 seed, was a really telling thing.
Yeah, it was a big game for the Sixers, and that was a fun game to watch too. It was back and forth throughout, high scoring, 2-star players at their very best in Giannis and Joe. And Joe just kind of taking over that game towards the end. That was his best game of the season, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that was a big win to go on the road in Milwaukee and pull off the upset on national television. So that was a big game.
It was a 3 o'clock game on a Sunday or something?
Something like that, yeah. So with my third biggest win for the Sixers this season, I'm going to go the one that I mentioned briefly before, going out to Oakland and beating the Warriors.
That was mine.
A game that I think they trailed by about 10 points at halftime, and they ended up taking over, and they won by maybe 10 or 15.
Won by 9 points, yep.
Something like that, yeah. They went out. They had a huge fourth quarter. Actually, I think it was a huge third quarter, and then they kept them at arm's length in the fourth quarter. That was Ben Simmons, really his coming out party. I think he had 31 points, I want to say.
Ben had 26.
26. Either way, he had a big game. He had a huge second half. He had a number of big plays in that one. That was his best game of the season, in my opinion. And just being able to go out and take down the defending champs on their home court, that was really impressive. And that's kind of what put the Sixers on the map this year.
Yeah, when you go out and you beat, when you go out and beat Golden State in their arena, that's something.
Granted, it was a Durantless Golden State, but still, with Steph Curry and all those
Doesn't
guys.
matter.
Actually, you know what? It was Klay Thompson they were without that game. Durant did play, and he wasn't very good.
I don't recall which one of them wasn't, but I do know that it wasn't the full complement of their starters. But as you mentioned, Ben actually went off twice against Golden State this year, which, again, for all people that say that he can't come out and play in big games, when Ben's really up against it and he feels and hears the criticism from within his own fan base, let alone the national media, with people saying that he doesn't show up in those types of games, that's when he comes out. You mentioned it. You go in that game and he had a 26, 8, and 6 stat line there. Joe also had a ridiculous game that night, 26 points, 20 boards for him. But even in that loss without Joel Embiid, I think it was like a week or so later, that 7-point loss or 3-point loss they ended up having, Ben Simmons had a triple-double, 25 points, 15 boards, and 11 assists in 41 minutes played. And that's against, again, the top-tier talent in the NBA. And we saw it twice in the playoffs where he was able to really take over a basketball game and be that version. To me, that's a sign of things to come. And the more confidence that he has in his ability to perform that kind of a level throughout an entire game, again, I think it speaks volumes to who he is as a player and his growth over from year 1 to year 2.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. He just needs to develop that jump shot. That's the biggest thing. And
again, as I mentioned in the Phillies segment, that we talk Sixers basketball, strangely enough,
with L.
But again, it was something that you needed to research, and I did because I'm a nerd. But if you combine the shots that he took from year 1 to year 2, he nearly doubled his jump shots from 10 to 14 feet, and I think it was 7 or 8% more shots he was knocking down. So he was taking more shots and knocking down more shots. So it was a lot of good things from Ben Simmons. It's easy to focus on, again, he's not immediately a superstar, but neither was Giannis in year 2. Giannis took a little bit of time. There are guys that don't just click, and Ben Simmons is 21 years old, so or 22, yeah. So he does have time. But we're gonna roll into we'll go through this real quick because, as I mentioned earlier on in this segment, this year's 76ers team actually used more players played minutes during this season than any year during the process era. 26 players dressed for the 76ers this year. So we're going to go through, we're going to give a quick letter grade and just a quick sentence as to why we're giving that grade. We're going to start with, and we're going to go in order of games played for the 76ers here. So playing 79 games, which led the team, was Ben Simmons. What is the grade that you would give our superstar point guard?
I give him a B.
Okay.
I think that he did enough, that he improved a little bit this season, came into his own a little bit, showed some maturity after he dealt with the booing in the playoffs, but he still needs to develop that jump shot.
I'm going to echo that B for similar reasons. I felt like there was some inconsistencies there with him, and if he could provide the same level of intensity and assertiveness that he did in Game 2, I think it was, of the Brooklyn series, and in those Golden State games, and in that Boston game, he played well too. Late in the season, if he could do that, he's in for a good go. JJ Redick playing 76 games or appearing in 76 games this year.
I give him a C. If we were going on the first half alone, I'd give him like a B+, but he was pretty bad in the second half, and he's even worse in the playoffs.
Yeah. I'm going to give him a C+. I think that his first half was spectacular. He was having damn near career numbers throughout the first half. Second half, he definitely cooled off. I don't think he was quite as bad in the playoffs as you make him out to be. But I think a C+ for a guy who's like, 34 years old.
Mid-30s, yeah.
With it, he never stops moving. He's like a jackrabbit out there. It's insane. Joel Embiid, for all of the time that we sit here and we say he can't stay on the court, played the third most games as a 76er this year at 64 games. So for the 64 games that he was there, and for those that he was not, what is the grade that you give Joe? I
give him an A-. If he could stay healthy, he would be an A.
I would give him a B+, because I feel like, at a certain point, you as the player need to be able to be honest with yourself and with your coaches and your medical staff about the way that you're being used. And I do think that this 76ers team represents the East in the finals if Joel Embiid is used appropriately in both the first and second half. And I don't think that injury happens. Jimmy Butler, everyone's favorite 76er right now, and hopeful re-signing at 29 years old, played 55 games for us. What do you give Jimmy?
B+. I'll go back to what I said before, that he had a lot of games where he was silent through three quarters, but he was the dog in the fourth quarter, and he came up huge in the playoffs as well. He was their best player, most consistent player in the playoffs. And every good team, every championship team needs to have that guy who plays the best when the games are the biggest, and that's Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, and for that reason, I'm going to give him an A-. He did exactly what we acquired him to do. We did not acquire him to be the ball-dominant guy throughout the regular season. We acquired him to be a closer, someone that we knew we could give the basketball to, and he would make things happen in the fourth quarter of games, in the fourth quarter of the regular season, and then throughout all the playoffs. And he did exactly that. And you mentioned it at every single turn that he was the best player on the court, or the most important player on the court. He was the best player on the court.
He became James when they needed him to.
Hilarious. I still love that. No, it's literally Jimmy. So our namesake, leader of the podcast, TJ McConnell, appeared in 76 games this year. Only started 3 of them. God, TJ's a funny cat. What do you give TJ?
Sorry, TJ, I gotta give you a C+ here. I mean, he's a nice guy off the bench, but I think teams started to figure him out a little bit as he played a little bit more. He wasn't as effective off the bench as he was in his first couple of seasons. But I think that he'll bounce back. He'll be a better bench guy next season if they keep him long. So, C+.
I'm going to go with a C. I feel like his role is more get the crowd involved when things aren't going right. But he's limited. He is exactly what he is, and I think that he got overexposed, and you're right. People figured him out. So he's a C, and I don't think he's back next year. This one saddens us. But we're going to go Landry Shamet for the 54 games he was a 76er before he went out to LA. What do you give Landry?
B-. Love the way he can shoot the three. Great bench player. gave us a lot of energy, played pretty well defensively in spurts. You know, he had his moments where he wasn't great, but for a rookie, I give him a B minus.
All right, I give him a C plus. It's not too different. I loathed his defense. I felt he bit a lot. But for a guy that we essentially drafted, I think he's 24th or 26th overall that year. Whatever we drafted Furkan as the year before or 2 years before we drafted him. He was a shooter, and when he was hot, man, I mean, he set the record for 76ers rookies, making 8 against, I think, Washington. Then I think he was traded the next night, so which is brilliant. But
his value.
Yeah, maybe we don't get that deal done without Landry putting a
just like when Colton
Landry
threw a
out.
no hitter before his trade.
Yeah, that's true. Trade him at their peaks. But yeah, C plus for me for Shamet. Mike Muscala, for insanely enough, and it seems like forever ago, but he was a 76er for 47 games.
I hated Muscala.
I also hated Muscala.
I'll give him a C minus.
No real need.
I mean, he just bricked way too much. The one game that I went to, he bricked every single shot that he took.
He's a terrible basketball player. And he didn't want to be a 76er. Like, he was one of those guys, he hated the 76ers, then he gets traded here, or signed here, whatever it was.
You can be friends with L.
So, yeah, right, ship them off, they can be miserable together. I'm going to go C minus for him. I felt like there was more value to his game that could have been there had he not sucked so damn bad, but he was terrible. So I disliked him a lot. Tobias Harris, 27 games as a 76er.
I'd give him a B minus. I mean, he was a nice piece. He had, like I said before, he had his moments. A guy who could shoot as a 4, definitely better than Wilson Chandler, so he's an upgrade there. But he also was not very good defensively, and he had his moments, especially sometimes in the playoffs, where he just didn't play very well.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I'm going to go C plus for Tobias Harris. For me, it was, we were trading a 3-point shooter, to acquire a pure shooter who could shoot from anywhere in the court, and again, 45% from 3 during his time in LA there, that first half of the season. He wasn't that here for the 76ers, and that was a big hit, and we felt that in the playoffs. Very streaky, so go to another streaky guy and missed some time with a knee injury there. 48 games played for Furkan Korkmaz.
I don't really have a whole lot on Furkan because he played a lot of meaningless minutes. I guess I'll give him like a C. But he was only ever out there when the game was a blowout. So I don't really have a whole lot to go off of there.
Yeah, Furkan, I'm giving it an incomplete, and I can't wait for you to not be a 76er.
Fair enough.
Mike Scott, 27 games, actually started 3 games for the 76ers this year.
C+. Big bench guy in the playoffs. He was easily their best bench guy ever since he came over in that trade. Made a lot of big plays, great hustle guy, not afraid to steal a beer on the sidelines every once in a while.
I think it was a scotch, which is even funnier, but good for Mike Scott.
He's a good character guy. I liked having him on the team, and I hope that he's back next year.
Yeah, I'm going to give him a C+ as well. He is one of those rare cases that I do think that Philadelphia is such a difficult town to be in as an athlete, and there are very few guys who mentally can handle this town and who are not great players who come here and become, an adequate player in their sport. I'm pretty sure Mike Scott would be out of the NBA in a year or two if he did not come to Philadelphia. But I think that because of coming here, he's going to be a guy that hangs around now because he showed his value. And, Philadelphia loves a guy like Mike Scott. So, but he was maddening at times, but certainly showed his value to a very thin bench. Jonah Bolden, interesting one here. 44 games played, 10 games started.
I really want to say that I like Bolden. I'm going to give him a C. Offensively, he's a 4 or a big guy. I think he usually plays 5. But he can knock down the outside shots. He's physical. He can rebound pretty well. But defensively, he has his faults, and he fouls so much. The few games that he started because Embiid was out, he was in foul trouble by the end of the first half. Mm-hmm. That's a big issue, especially for a guy who's supposed to be a backup. If you can't go more than a few minutes without picking up a couple of fouls, then you pretty much lose your value.
Yeah, I'm going to give Jonah a C minus because the same things that have plagued his game throughout his professional career plagued him again this year. And I do feel like the coaching staff did him a disservice by not really playing him in meaningful moments where he could really learn to work on his craft that way. But yeah, he's a frustrating player to me. You know, he's someone that you can tell has ability. He's certainly athletic. He is strong, but he is very, very undisciplined, both sides of the floor. Amir Johnson and everyone's favorite cell phone.
I'm going to give him an F.
An F?
Yeah, he's terrible. But guess what? He's not the only F.
Okay.
We'll get another one. Wait and see who it is.
Amir Johnson, I'm going to give a D. For me, you're here specifically for veteran leadership and character building and ensuring that, a very young roster for the first half of the season and then a championship caliber roster for the second half of the season was able to gel and come prepared every day. And you had one job to do and you picked up a cell phone at halftime anyway. So you're a jackass, but
you know what? I did appreciate the fact that he voluntarily set himself down to the 87ers just to get some playing time.
Yeah, I mean, and naturally his next, the next available Sixers game he played and was terrible. But yeah, sure, let's give Brett some false hope that you can actually still play the game of basketball. And I didn't always hate Amir. I didn't hate him last year. I just think this is a really difficult year for him. This one pains me. Two of the next three, kind of all three of them pain me. So we'll give them in a crunch here. Because there were three pieces that were traded. Robert Covington, Markelle Fultz, and Dario Saric. It was 13 games, 19 games, and 13 games.
Okay, so who are we going with first?
Rocco, then Fultz, and then Dario.
Rocco, I guess I'll give him like a C. He didn't play that well before he was traded. He kind of struggled a little bit up and down. His shooting wasn't as good as it normally was throughout the beginning of his career. So yeah, I think a C is a fair grade for him. And now that we're going on the Fultz, we're getting my second F. As in, fuck you and your thoracic outlet syndrome. Good riddance. Enjoy Orlando. $1 in the swear jar.
No, take that back. It's fine. Anything, you could say whatever you want about Markelle Fultz. And then Dario Saric for the last chunk one on that.
Dario, I'm going to give him a C+. Normally I would give a guy like him a C, but I'm a big Dario fan.
Yeah.
I think he brought something off the bench that they kind of lacked after he was gone. He could shoot the ball a little bit, although he's inconsistent. Played pretty good defense. He could rebound pretty well. Not really a star at anything, but just a pretty decent all-around player. So I'm going to give him a C+.
All right, so we saw things a slightly different. And I am a big Rocco fan. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with your C. I think that was probably the best he looked. He was a B+, A- for me. He improved in every single category that people hated him for. And I did. My favorite segment I've ever been on was me sitting here talking with Kev about Robert Covington and explaining why he needed to be appreciated by the fans of Philadelphia and how he's improved in every single stat line and every single thing that people hated him for. And he just came to work every day and he was just someone that you knew you could play 40+ minutes. And I loved him.
And then he got traded right after that.
The next day, making it I don't even know if the segment was published yet. I was so angry. But yeah, I was a big Rocco fan. Markelle Fultz, I am gonna give an F as well. It pains me because I do still believe he's a very talented kid. I just think that he's never going to get out of his own head. So that guy, just him and his entire camp, I'm so glad they're out of here. And the third one there, Dario, like you, I'm also a big fan. You gave him a C+?
I did.
All right, so we actually agree on that one. So this was easily the most difficult year of Dario's career. He did not really fit in this season with the Sixers, and he struggled. And then it took a little bit for him to get going in Minnesota, and eventually he did, and he became the exact player that he is in Philadelphia. A little bit of a Swiss Army knife. So to two of the three of you, we miss you dearly, and we wish you well. I can't wait until you're 76ers again, because it will happen in my crazy brain. That's how that works. Markelle, just, I don't know, man. I don't know. All right, now we get into a couple trade pieces that were acquired as well. So Boban, James Ennis, not Jared Ennis, because we were texting about my buddy who used to work for me who hit a monster home run to center field in your high school game that you called.
He did, yeah, he crushed it.
During an entire Q&A segment, I called James Ennis Jared Ennis. So we're unintentionally making a high school kid famous right now. But Boban, James Ennis, and Jonathan Simmons. So Boban appeared in 22 games, James 18, and Jonathan Simmons in 15.
I'll give Boban a C+. I mean, he's a nice guy off the bench, but there are certain matchups where he just didn't work out at all, especially in the Toronto series. I was kind of surprised to find out that he did have some sort of an offensive or an outside game. I know he had maybe 2 or 3 3-pointers during his time here. Shot the free throw pretty well for a guy his size. No athleticism, not great defensively, but I love the fact that he can dunk without jumping.
It's
cool.
weird to see.
Yeah.
Next one was James Ennis.
James Ennis, C-. Every time I saw him out in the court, he kind of looked a little bit lost out there. He had a few good games where he made some nice plays, but just didn't see enough good out of him this year.
And then Jonathan Simmons.
D-. He was definitely the bad Simmons out there every single time that he stepped on the court.
Correct. So Boban, I'm going to give a C to. He's very limited in what he does well, and for 6 to 8 minutes a night during the regular season, he's fine, but he is certainly a liability against anyone athletic. James Ennis, for me, was a C+, and he actually, I think, probably could have ended up being like a B- B for me had he not hurt his hamstring. We really saw how thin our bench was when he was not a part of it. And that Brooklyn series turned around because he got healthy again and was able to work himself in. And his 6 to 10 minutes a night on the floor really made a difference. And that did kind of carry through to Toronto. So had he been able to stay healthy, his grade would have been higher. Jonathan Simmons, really disappointed in, to see that was the piece that we got in this full steal, the player piece anyway. That's frustrating. He, by all accounts, was a very competent player and in his time in Orlando, and damn it, he was not that here. I do respect his exit interview where he hopes to work on his game and to, integrate himself more into, the playable minutes time for Brett Brown and into those rotations. So that was big. So now we're going to get into some people who played damn near no games, but a couple D-League guys, a couple guys who were acquired late. Corey Brewer for a 10-day contract.
I loved him while I was here. I wish
Double
they brought
zero.
him back. I mean, I'd give him maybe a B-. He had a really big game against Houston the one night where he was just hitting every single shot that he took.
And he was all over Harden, and it was hilarious.
He played great defense. Not a really talented player, but a guy who's going to give you 110% every single time he steps on the court. So I really respected that about him. So I'll give him a B-.
I'm also going to go with a B- for Corey Brewer, and all I can say about him is I so wish that we had him on the bench as another playable swingman big out there who could have given a spell.
I mean, I'd take him over
Jonah
or Jonathan Simmons.
Yeah.
Either one of those guys.
For sure. Our guy didn't get into any games. Not any game. He got into 6 games. But Zaire Smith, who damn near died for us. What do you give the kid?
I'm going to give him a C+. I still have that image stuck in my mind of him clumsily missing a layup. I think it was in his 2nd or 3rd game. But he got after it pretty well when he came back. It's kind of hard when you're a rookie and you're playing your first game towards the end of the season because of injury. So I'll give him a little break. I'll give him a C+.
Yeah, I'm going to give him an incomplete. I felt like he didn't get into any meaningful minutes, 6 games. He was, again, a non-factor to the 76ers this year. I think he only dressed a handful of times in the playoffs. So I feel for him. It's a difficult rookie year, but welcome to the 76ers organization. If we draft you in the first round or trade to acquire you in the first round, your ass is going to break something in your lower body. Now we're going to get into some people that no one gives a damn about, so we'll go through the 4 names really, really quickly. You could just give a letter grade, and if you want to give a sentence on any one of them, go for it. Greg Monroe, Hayward Highsmith, Demetrius Jackson, and Justin Patton.
All right, well, Greg Monroe's getting a D-, and the only reason he's not getting an F is because he had one decent game in the playoffs. And the other 3
Greg
are all
Monroe
getting
game.
incomplete because I don't know anything about him.
Well, Hayward Highsmith is a great basketball name, and I wish that he was something. And at 22 years old, there's hope that he becomes maybe something. Demetrius Jackson makes me laugh just every time he's on the court. Justin Patton really pissed me off because I liked that throw-in part of the deal for him in the Jimmy Butler trade, and I did believe that he was going to be able to be a playable big in the playoffs, and he just never really took. He was hurt. He was recovering from injury and went into the D-League, or G-League, whatever we're calling it now. So that's all that stuff is certainly frustrating. Let me bring this stuff up now. All right. So we got about like 10 minutes left. So we'll go through this real quickly. The process is complete. It's done. Joel announced it done. It is after the game presser. And it's true, with that lottery party, or the lottery, this year and not getting into it, that completes, every piece and every trade that we had there.
I wonder if Matt Cord's not going to introduce him as the process anymore.
I'm sure he will.
Probably will. It just sounds awesome when he does it.
Oh yeah, and Matt Cord's really good too. But I'm just going to take you through a couple key points of this process here, and then we'll get out of here. But 2013 draft Michael Carter Williams. We assume that he is going to be something. He wins Rookie of the Year, and he wins Rookie of the Year specifically because he's on a terrible basketball team that allowed him to play 35 minutes a night. But as the rest of his career has gone, he's garbage. But that was
Chicago now or something like that.
He's in Orlando.
Well,
yep.
Yeah.
And he lit us up. Kind of. They get like 6 points against us. But it's lighting us up for that.
The land of Sixers has-beens. Orlando.
Yeah, right. But Drew Holiday trade, we end up getting their Nerlens Noel, and then Alfred Payton, who we would then trade for Dario Saric. Brett Brown gets hired. Tony Roten gets drafted, who was my favorite process Sixer. I believe that he would have been fantastic.
He was everybody's favorite process Sixer.
He's just some guy who just went out there and just chucked shots up all the time. He was fantastic. But Evan Turner gets moved. Spencer Hawes gets moved. We eventually, 2014 comes, we draft Joel Embiid, and that becomes like the beginning of the end of this thing. We understand that, this was a guy that if he was healthy, probably, could have competed for the number 1 pick that year. That was our winless for Wiggins year. Everyone was pretty down on that. And Joel Embiid, I think we can all say, we're pretty damn happy things shook out the way that they did.
Because what the hell has Andrew Wiggins done in the NBA?
Nothing but be a bitch. No. Like, not even $1 to swear jar for that. That guy's just a jackass.
Hey, bitch is a female dog, so it's not even a swear word.
Yeah, sure. Technicalities. But this entire process, as we go through and as I, read some of those things, everything was to acquire movable assets. It was acquiring veteran contracts that you could kind of, it was almost baseball like, let's sign a veteran to a 1-year deal and hope we can flip it, at the deadline. Let's have a few, second round picks and see what we can't package here to get some draft and stash pieces. And that's how we, again, the Dario stuff, and different things like that. But was there any one thing about the process years that really stuck out to you as something that you still go back on and you say, damn, I can't believe that we actually had to go through this?
I mean, obviously losing 72 games in 1 year, or 70 games, whatever it was. And here we are, 3 years later, 3 years after that, and we're a team that's coming off a second consecutive 50-win season, second consecutive second-round appearance in the playoffs. It's just crazy to think how far this team has come in such a short period of time. And I'm happy that they've stuck with Brett Brown throughout the whole thing. Brett Brown was with the team throughout the those terrible years where they were losing 60, 70 games. So I think it's only right that he's with the team now and guaranteed another year now that they're a competitor.
Yeah, and for me, I think the biggest thing was this team throughout this entire thing. We gave guys NBA careers who otherwise may not have had NBA careers. Who's to know what a guy like Robert Covington would have ever become, in the NBA had it not been for what the 76ers were able to do with him and allow for him to do against NBA level talent and to continue to give him minutes. So I kind of look back on it and you look at some of the names of the people that we got and some of the small pieces and throw-in parts of deals and different guys we drafted in the second round that ended up like being something like Rashawn Holmes. Like we all loved him for what he was. Not a very good basketball player, but like these were the things that the process was about was acquiring these people and and again making something out of nothing. And it was a really strange era of basketball to watch, but it's complete now, and again, this coming off season is going to be incredibly important for the direction of this franchise. And with that, we'll give 2 final grades and then 1 final thought on the 76ers season as a whole. So 2 final grades: Brett Brown, the GM coach, and then Elton Brand, the few weeks in GM, first year as a GM at the NBA level. We'll go with Elton Brand first, and then we'll go Brett Brown since he's a little more polarizing.
I'll give Elton Brand an A-. I loved his aggressiveness going out there and making those trades for Jimmy and the trade for Toby and Bobby and Mike Scott. I think that he did everything that he could to make this team a contender, to make this team, honestly, if they got past the second round, I think that they would have been right up there with Golden State in terms of having a chance of winning a championship. And that's thanks to Elton Brand. He made all those moves that made this possible to have such a good and fun basketball team to watch. So A- for him.
I'm gonna go B+. I feel like, and this is not entirely on him. In fact, it's very small on him, a small percentage of blame towards him. But the lack of attention to acquiring true bench pieces that were going to be playable in the playoffs, so that you did not have to play every one of your starting 5 in 40 minutes, or the range of 40 minutes, night in and night out, was a big deal to me. And I appreciate what he acquired in a Boban and a Mike Scott, but Boban is not a playoff player, and Mike Scott, on almost any other roster, he's not a playoff player. So there were, I understood the attempt in getting something there in Jonathan Simmons. I will give him that, but I'm going to go B+. I appreciate the aggressiveness that you mentioned as well, which is the only reason it's not lower. But it was an incomplete team going into this playoff run. And then we'll go Brett Brown here for the final grade before we get to a final thought. Brett Brown is a player or coach? Coach GM?
GM. Well, I'm going to base my grade off of his performance as a coach. I'm going to give him an A-. He had some issues where he was a little bit too stubborn in making changes. I think that he overcame that, and we saw that in the playoffs. And, you got to give the guy a break for the fact that he was dealing with different rosters and different starting lineups throughout the course of the season because of the trades and because of the injuries, especially to Joel. He had a lot of games where he didn't have that full complement of starting players, the full starting 5 after they made the trade, especially because of that injury. So for him to be able to piece it together and then, do as well as they did in the playoffs, and honestly, they should be playing for the Eastern Conference Championship, I think that Brett should get a lot of credit for that.
I agree, and I'm about as big of a Brett supporter as you'll find. I will go with a B. I'm not willing to go quite as high as you are. I do feel like the first half and the way that Joel Embiid was managed is, and it's not entirely on him, but at the end of the day, he's the one making the in-game decisions about him. The lack of playable players behind him made it a necessity, but I felt like there were times where he really could have managed that better. And ultimately, if Joel's healthy for the second half of the regular season and plays more minutes with the new starting five going into the playoffs, you're right. We are absolutely playing for an Eastern Conference finals, and in all likelihood, could represent the East in the NBA Finals against a team like Golden State, who we saw success with and without Joel Embiid. So it would have been a really, really interesting season. And finish to the season had that type of thing been managed differently. However, all the things that you mentioned, and a lot of gripes that fans have with him, he improved upon, not unlike Ben Simmons. So I give him a lot of credit, and I'm really, really happy for him that he's coming back next year. But before we close it out, one last thought on the 76ers season as a whole for you.
Up and down. The trades made it really entertaining, bringing in the star players. Lack of a bench really hurt them at the end. So the thing that they need to do for the offseason, they need to find a way to keep Jimmy and Toby around, but they also need to find a way to work those contracts so that they can afford to shore up the bench as well. But a fun season to watch, disappointing that it ended the way that it did, and when it did, I thought this team had the potential to go so much deeper. But it was a fun season to watch, and it was one that really made me proud to be a fan of the 76ers.
Yeah, I agree. For me, and management of the organization has already said that they're committed to doing whatever is necessary to keep championship level basketball in Philadelphia, and that includes paying the luxury tax penalties. And I respect that. My biggest takeaway from this season is that the city of Philadelphia is very quickly becoming a sports destination city again. People want to come and play here. And I think it's going to be a test to that if Jimmy Butler does choose to come. I actually think that if it was up to Jimmy Butler, and just Jimmy Butler, he would be a 76er next year. And for the duration of his max contract that he's undoubtedly going to get. He does seem like such a team and family guy, though. Like his personal team, like what his trainers, his shot coaches, his dietitians, everyone that he talks about him all the time, everyone that gets him ready to play every day. They go where he goes. And he mentioned in his exit press conference that a lot of them were away from their family for the last several months. And I'm proud of the city of Philadelphia for making this such a special place to play sports and watch sports and be a fan, because I think that for guys like Jimmy Butler to go back to his team of guys and say, hey, you're going to love it here. Guys like Bryce Harper, who says he wants to raise a family here. Guys like Carson Wentz, who are undoubtedly going to want to play the entirety of his NFL career here. Carter Hart and what the Flyers could end up being. Yeah. It's a really special sports town, and the 76ers gave us a really special season and a special ride, and it sucks that it's over. Not unlike you, I felt like they could have gone, much further. But looking forward to an active off season. We will have another episode on the off season, and we're going to kind of armchair GM it with a handful of us here to what we would do to make the roster work next year. Now that we know Brett Brown is coming back, but that'll be it for TJ's One of Us here for the Always Next Year podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Shane_Mead, and you can find Rob on Twitter.
Radio_Rob.
And let the Jackdaws and their Irish folk rock carry us out.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son still had me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
This has been a production of the Always Next Year Podcast Network. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, Spreaker, and SoundCloud. Please also remember to rate and review this podcast to validate our members' life choices. We appreciate it. This is AMYP, signing off.